Hi, everyone. I'm Iris Ruiz, Assistant Director of the UC Merced Merit Writing Program and continuing lecturer. I wanted to start off by saying that I plan to be there in person to give this talk face-to-face, but due to a personal injury, I opted for this route. Still, I hope to see everyone next year, and I miss everyone. I also wanted to acknowledge the indigenous terrains that we are all living and breathing in as I speak here this evening. I'm going to situate this talk within 5 years of disciplinary history, 3 of which were drastically altered due to COVID. I consider 4Cs to be a foundational professional event that provides a reflection of where the field has been, where it is going, and where it currently stands. Being that I have been heavily immersed in many key leadership and professional roles pertaining to these changes, today I'm choosing to depart from the traditional slide deck and talk and engage in a first-person mini autoethnography. For more about autoethnography as method, please see Race, Rhetoric, and Research Methods, published by the WAC Clearinghouse in 2022. This brief autoethnographic account is my recollection of 5 key events that sparked an intense and rapid shift in the field since 2018. This shift has only been mimicked in the past by 2 other events, which are 1, the death of Martin Luther King Jr., and 2, the introduction of Web 2.0. If you're interested in my written history of the field, please see Reclaiming Composition. After sharing these 5 moments, I want to share an example of what coalitional knowledge making can look like in relation to one particular CFP I engaged with that centered upon the idea of network theory. Story time. 5 years ago in 2018, there was a post to the now defunct disciplinary listserv, the WPAL, about the 2019 4C CFP that asked the question, is this the first CFP for a major flagship conference to use AAVE extensively? That is African American Vernacular English? This discussion lasted for a week. It was the same year that members were conflicted about whether or not to go to C's because of SB 43, a racist law that was coined the Jim Crow Bill. As a result of this conflict, a call to move the conference to a different location, the Social Justice Action Committee was created as a way to keep the conference in Kansas City, Missouri, while showing a commitment to social justice and activism. The actual charge of this committee was to better address issues of equity and safety at our convention site. 4 years ago in 2019, Asal delivered his speech, "How do we language so people stop killing each other? Or what do we do about white language supremacy?" He pissed off a lot of people, to say the least. In that same year, 2 months later, one of our well-known disciplinary journals was asked to retract a CFP based upon the following. This CFP both centered white queer studies and erased the theoretical work by feminist scholars of color and critical race scholars foundational to any conversation about embodiment, trans, and queer studies. Notable, it also invoked the murder of Dana Martin in a way that unintentionally functioned as spectacle. We agree with our colleagues' assessment of these failings in the call and are taking this opportunity to withdraw it. We apologize to our colleagues who found themselves marginalized, erased, or harmed by the CFP, and to colleagues who have been working on proposals. Certainly, we expect and our readers expect more from this particular journal. 2 years ago, in September of 2021, The Linking Toward Pluriversal Rhetorics was published in College English, and 1 month later, a response was posted in Constellations alleging, "This is a story." Fallout between cultural rhetoricians and decolonial rhetoricians occurred. This fallout serves as an example of how BIPOC scholars also struggle to claim space for our own voices in a community that has often marginalized us. It was a hurtful encounter to witness and to be a part of. Lastly, close to a year ago today, a CFP titled Practical Examples of Teaching Toward Linguistic Justice, Applying Anti-Racist Critical Language, Decolonial, L2, and Translingual Pedagogies in the Writing Classroom. This was also recalled citing Choices made in the CFP reflect an ongoing history of race and racism in higher education by erasing and co-opting the work of scholars of color. Now that I've shared these 5 events, let me ask you this. What do these 5 metamorphic moments I just shared have to do with the definition of community? People have been called communist, have even been accused of indoctrinating socialist ideologies, and as being opposers of academic freedom in engaging in such acts. These moments attempt to show, at best, a snapshot of the many tensions that have taken place over the past 5 years. How do we build community through all of this disciplinary and scholarly tension? It is important to recognize that the term community is hard to define, as a definition depends on the way it is being used or interpreted. For Burke, all communication, all rhetoric arises from such dialectical tensions, a process from which the dramatic pentab illustrates. So let me ask, what does community mean to you? Too many times when the word community is mentioned as either a noun or, as in the case of building community, a verb, it is thought as a utopia or as creating utopia, as possibly building a safe commune off the grid in extreme terms, or as leaning toward equitable and just societies in a communist socialist sense. So what does belonging to an academic community mean? And for what purpose do we become part of an academic community? How is answering this last question particularly complicated when one considers that our discipline admits that academic communities are exclusive and have been called out as being both sexist and racist on the WPAL? I'd like to complicate this notion of academic communities a bit further, because there are those of us who have ascribed to the idea that gaining academic literacy is an act toward linguistic and discursive exclusivity, a type of Burkean democratic literacy. We show up to the Burke parlor and we don't know how to participate because we don't understand the discourse. We learn the discourse, what Burke calls God terms, that allow us to participate through discursive commonalities, but we don't recognize ourselves in the mirror. Have we really become part of a community, or have we lost a part of ourselves to be accepted into a silo? If academic communities were inclusive, then why do we have this idea of discursive disruptions and decolonial practices like epistemic disobedience? I ask these questions because I think it's important to be very specific when we enter into discussions of community. And I believe it's important to complicate the notion of community. As a matter of fact, I'd like to argue for a resistance to the idea of community as an initiation into a common discourse and as the acceptance of linguistic and discursive exclusivity. Instead of community in the way that academic community and discourse community are thought of, I'd like to think of community building as a networked practice of coalitional knowledge building, one that allows for a quick epistemic violence and trauma check-in, similar to the ways that those 2 CFPs were questioned and called out in the beginning of this talk. Doing this type of check-in means to consider what exactly are we engaging in when we decide to enter into academic discursivity and theorizing, considering how discursive exclusivity can induce trauma on an epistemic level. These check-ins allow permission to consider breaking epistemic boundaries and not be afraid to ask, in the case of network theory, who else theorizes networks, communities, the non-human agents, and the history of knowledge? Further, by what means do they get there? Linguistically, generically, and theoretically. Asking these questions can prevent CFP recalls and retractions from happening in the way that I shared earlier. Building epistemic coalitions allows for collective knowledge building that embraces the tensions that our discipline has currently, within the past 5 years, found itself in. You may be wondering, what does building an epistemic coalition look like? Consider the following montage and think about the words community versus coalition. First, an Indigenous community is a recognizable community of people who originated in historically settled in a geographical area or areas that were burdened or impacted by colonialism. Indigenous communities are characterized by social, cultural, and economic conditions which distinguish them from other sections of the national community. Next, then, consider an ambient community. An ambient community is thought of as being created by engagement in social media networks where ambient relationships are built. You post, you tweet, you share, I read, I listen, I see. Maybe we interact briefly, but I can feel closeness to you without actually having it in real life. So often I see what you're doing, you see me, but we're never quite talking to each other. And this is what constitutes an ambient community. When looking at communities from a social or technological view, these online communities are usually easy identifiable for what they support or do and can be searched for on most social networking platforms. All of these nonverbal social cues available on social networking sites help to build an online persona of friends that the user can then connect with in their everyday life. Online social communities don't necessarily fit the same definition of a physical community. However, they are still a collection of individuals who have come together in a common place. So just considering these two communities gives us pause. What about a coalition of the above? An Indigenous ambient community? We haven't even considered generational networks. What about the DIY generation? What about millennials? Gen Z? A coalition considers a montage of what all of the above communities and networks look like, and this is what we're working toward. Let's look at this from a different perspective. Using myself as an example of a different positionality, one that aligns me at a great distance from an academic community that I seek entrance into. I'm always automatically positioned at a juncture of the dissensus position offered by Joseph Harris in his definition of community, also aligned with the practice of epistemic disobedience, as Walter Magnola would call an epistemic dissensus. I'm always seeking to be accepted by referring to the epistemic terms of what the field considers what we know and threshold concepts that don't necessarily serve as discursive reference to what I really mean, ontologically speaking. Because we know that this type of epistemic conflict can be a violent process for BIPOC, I argue that we, as a field, need to rethink how we engage in epistemic and discursive conflict, especially in the age of disinformation. Not doing so can result in continued acts of epistemic violence and elides a true engagement with and commitment to building coalitions in epistemic spaces that share much more than we have been willing to admit. Consider what happened with the 2021 college introduction on delinking. No one who witnessed the exchange would argue against the fact that there was an element of epistemic violence that occurred, which felt very exclusive. However, the symptom exhibited by this manifestation of epistemic violence has a definite cause, enjoined by epistemic exclusivity and a culture of violent acts aimed at protecting epistemic space. Suffice it to say that such epistemic spaces can point to colonialism at their root cause. With that said, today I'm still searching for what it means to build decolonial epistemic coalitions by sharing one particular process of community building as fellow writers attempted to bridge gaps between decolonial theory and actor network theory. This process highlights how a particular focus on a woman of color's voice became the centerpiece from which to build this collaborative knowledge community. It also seeks to problematize how editorial calls for proposals can unintentionally hinder coalitional building by reaffirming disciplinary divisiveness and unidisciplinarity. While the chapter I'm going to refer to is in the final proofing stages, the chapter has not yet been published. It will be published through the University of Utah Press in a couple of weeks. Story time. On June 14th, 2019, I received a CFP. It was titled Network Theories, Social Justice, and Super Systems in Writing Program Administration. I'd like to point to the following portion of the CFP. Systems impose agencies or act like agentive beings that shape how administrators act, impose deficit-based pedagogies or approaches, stifle emotional and physical wellness, and or perpetrate problematic labor practices. Liu, 1992, Matsuda, 2006, Ottenmeyer, Narzik, 2010, Boylan and Bonehan, 2014, Poe, Inouye, Elliott in 2018. We are looking for contributions that are theoretically grounded in areas such as writing program administration and posthumanism, anti-racist network theory, eco-social systems theory, activity theory, rhetorical genre studies, actor network theory, neuropsychology, new materialism, object-oriented rhetoric, and or ambient rhetoric. And then I'd like to consider the 3 bullet points that went along with the CFP. Bullet point number 1, what theories might be considered to help untangle networks and systems that remain resistant to positive change, even when campus collaborators and stakeholders are not? How and in what ways might non-human actors have agency over humans in WPA and related work? How might we move toward personal and communal wellness when stymied by existing networks and systems? And that CFP. As one may or may not notice, there was plenty of room to consider in that CFP decolonial theory, border theory, and actor network theory. However, what became apparent to me as I began to think about the amount of distance between my epistemological area of focus and those epistemic frameworks listed in the CFP, such as actor network theory, systems theory, and mindfulness, is that there really was not that much distance at all. But if I had never engaged with actor network theory, I might not have ever considered the epistemological overlaps and possibilities for coalitional knowledge building with the group of writers I was about to engage with. This knowledge building and sharing process came easy to me. I was used to epistemological crossroads, and I was writing about the process of Nepantla as a writing method. Additionally, as I mentioned above, my positionality puts me in a default position of epistemic dissensus, since I've always positioned myself as a post-structuralist, a decolonial scholar, and a critical race theorist. I'm more inclined to align with the conflictive possibilities of knowledge construction that arise out of tension, disagreement, and dialogue. With this CFP and the practice of building upon knowledge coalitions, in 2019, I and 5 other writing studies scholars collaborated to document some of the most tenuous events that occurred on the historically famous listserv, WPAL. What resulted was the documentation of what the field now recognizes as the feminist revolution and the Grand Scholar Wizard events. The plan was to have several listserv participants render their account of how the listserv fell from grace, their part in it, and how it ultimately dissipated due to hostile exchanges between graduate students and faculty, both current and retired. Early on in the process, I knew that I would not engage in this project without calling in decolonial theory and calling out actor network theory for failing to acknowledge the works of decolonial scholars. Like the retracted and recalled CFPs I started out this talk with, there was a type of epistemic erasure that was occurring in actor network scholarship. My white colleagues agreed with me, so here is what we came up with as a coalitional example. Turning toward a complementarity of theoretical framing through actor network theory and decoloniality helped us to examine how WPAL's discursive patterns reflected and reified hegemonic dispositions in writing studies. Rooted in his observation that rather than making individuals freer from social and natural constraints, modernity had exacerbated the oppressive dimensions of our relationships to one another and the world. Latour, 2013, proposed that modern institutions, such as academic disciplines, should identify the prepositional keys or dispositions by which they discursively arrive at their own social facts, as therein lies the ontological foundation upon which rests modern Western civilization, self-conceptualization. While some writing studies scholars have criticized actor network theory for failing to account for human agency and oppression as historical, material, and embodied, Bazerman 1997, 1999, Russell 1999, Scott and Welch 2014, we see actor network theory as integral to our examination of how modern institutions and their associated discourses and epistemologies have formed around the need to establish and defend particular modes of being, including white supremacy. So that was what we came up with. And it took quite a while for us to come to a point where we understood what was happening at the epistemological crossroads between actor network theory and decolonial theory. We were very happy with the result. So I'd like to end here today by arguing that we need more tenured colleagues to come out with critiques on epistemic exclusivity. We need sustained critiques or exegetics solutions. Doing so will show a continued commitment to doing something about epistemological biases in the field. I will also show a firm commitment, and I will also call out allies and or accomplices in helping this field to move forward in a way that calls out the politics of citation, the inherent biases in the work we do, the exclusivity of the hiring processes, the exclusivity of the definition of rhetoric, the narrow conception of the field's genesis, the ways that POC or people of color constantly have to be the forerunners for social justice. I end with these asks because while rhetoric and writing studies does not necessarily claim to have a canon, those who are in the field are usually required to take either a rhetorical theory seminar, composition theory seminar, or writing practicum, which often consists of common texts such as Crosstalk and Comp Theory, the Norton Book of Composition Studies, or the works of Berlin, Bruffy, Burke, Aristotle, Plato, and Bartholomew, Flower and Hayes, Fagley, Harris, and or the Braddock Essays. So one could say that the field is in a sense canonified. In our current historical moment where we are at a crossroads, exposing borders between theories can provide possibilities for coalitional epistemics and environmental justice. Creating coalitional knowledges teaches people to think and act differently. Some possibilities include the borders between post-structuralism, critical race theory, decolonial theory, actor network theory, postmodernism, modernism, rhetorical theory, and discourse analysis, and think about a montage of how those work together. Building knowledge through coalitional practices will also help us to better prepare our students to understand epistemological borders as continued ripe spaces for possibilities of coalitional communal practices that would contribute to a better cultural and natural environment. In closing, the practice of coalitional knowledge building contributes to better ecological futures in need of epistemic innovation and recovery, a process that can only be achieved if we understand the interreliance of both human and non-human agents. Thank you.